I see photography is kind of like a portal to me. They say, reality is stranger than fiction. I completely agree with that. The New Dutch Views project is kind of the result of a story, personal story, my personal relationship, both with the medium of photography, as a photographer, but also as an artist, and also my relationship with, I guess, the Muslim religion. Although in my work, I don't really try to focus on my own relationship. It's more, let's say that the images are the results of a motivation to kind of focus on this project. I mean, it's a long-term series. Now I've been working on it for almost 4 years, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere near an end. It's just expanding. So to be able to to have the motivation and the desire to focus on such a thing, I think has to be the result of a kind of personal relationship with the subject matter. But I'm not really trying to make that apparent and to make it about me. So I think that it all really began when I started photography, kind of by chance. I did not study art. Let's say I didn't study visual art or painting or drawing, but when I was a teenager, I was really into poetry. Actually, a lot of it from the 60s. I studied in a French school. I grew up in the French part of Switzerland. So poetry in the French language is also something that is often a part of your education when you study a bit of literature in high school. And I really liked that the creativity inside, this idea of there's a kind of perennial truth inside poetry that you find, beauty of kind of form and aesthetic. And what I liked about the poetry in the 60s is that it was actually very popular in terms of the language. It was very accessible. I came to photography kind of by chance. I had a mobile phone and I was working in the mountains. At the time I was studying hotel management. So I worked as a waiter on the mountaintop in a little kind of wooden chalet in the Alps. And I would actually have to sleep at the top of the mountain almost more or less on my own every night at the end of the day. And everyone leaves the mountain, all the people skiing, they all go home. People working on the lifts, they go home, and I'm just alone at the top of the mountain, And it was a really, I think, kind of a spiritual experience, but also the first time I actually started to take pictures just really, intuitively. I was photographing the skyline, the landscape, and it created something really in me. I don't know what it was, but I had the strong conviction that I wanted to use all my money to buy an actual camera. And then I just started making pictures. And I think from the beginning, I was just really into making pictures. I studied photography a bit. I worked with a watch photographer, a still life photographer, and he gave me like a very technical education. So while I was studying in this school in Vevey, I basically spent most of my time assisting a photographer who worked with a lot of lights. And he had a way of working with light and with photography that I very much appreciated. He would go very much into the details. There was a lot of atmosphere in his images. I do, value technique and the craftsmanship of the medium. I did a civil service and I worked for a human rights NGO in Geneva. And this was a really important experience for me because that's when I started actually thinking about the relationship between politics, perception, representation, the media. And I started actually kind of studying politics or social issues, political issues. And I got involved with story making. I was interviewing people who'd come out of prisons, who'd been kidnapped by governments, who'd been tortured, who'd been gone through all kinds of mainly injustices, and these lawyers were working from Geneva. And it was very, very serious subject matter. It was very inspiring to be just as a human experience to be with people who had been through a lot more struggle and difficulty and challenges in life than I had myself growing up in a very safe, peaceful environment in Switzerland. I'd seen enough about like how war was covered in the Middle East to want to show maybe things from another perspective, to show maybe a more humanistic perspective without going into the cliches, because humanistic photography and film, there are a lot of cliches. And I think that that's where poetry comes in, good poetry can't be cliche. It's like good arts can't be cliche. Maybe it takes it another step further, you know. Good art or good poetry feels like you're discovering something for the first time, and that can't be, you know, it's not like a repeated motif. I didn't have in my mind just that idea of making pictures and selling them. I really wanted to kind of tell a story, and I had a certain way that I wanted to tell the story. And I realized that some of my pictures, they just didn't fit the way the media normally showed things about the subject matter. And so I thought, well, the best thing would probably be to study art. And I went to Holland because it seemed like they had a good program. I got deep into the craft, I'd say deeper into the craft of photography and thinking creatively. And it was harder to find subject matter when you're, you know, new in a town and there's just, you know, I'm not in Egypt or in Cairo. It was like exciting stuff that I really wanted to depict. So you had to play with these limitations. But at the same time, I was really interested in art philosophy and history. When I went and worked from the human rights NGO time, I also discovered Islam, and I started to practice Islam. I had kind of been around it growing up, but not really. I just really had a strong attraction to Islam at a later age. Around that age, before that, I was really questioning a lot of things, and I was looking for answers, and I found a lot of them in Islam. So that really, it shaped me in a way to become kind of a practicing Muslim. When I went into art school, I didn't want to also just study the history, but I also had this interest in studying Islamic art and also, you know, non-Western art. I think, first of all, people define Islamic art differently. You know, there's different ways of defining it. I think that my interest in Islamic art is also an interest in traditional Islamic art. In photography, I did not find much, actually. I felt like I was really going into new territory. There's no photographer that I've discovered who really tried to create let's say, a Muslim theology of photography in a way, like, or a practice of photography that's kind of in harmony with, Islamic principles and all that. I haven't heard about it being formalized. So, well, I've done a lot of research about that. Part of it is kind of related to, well, what's the essence of Islamic arts? And I looked at, well, the main art forms in Islamic arts are the recitation of the Quran and Islamic calligraphy and I would say architecture. Well, there are sacred art forms that also have a kind of religious function. However, in my work, I'm not trying to create a religious function. I'm addressing anyone, and I'm not using any language. And you know, architecture is a space, you go there to worship. Calligraphy is a writing, you're reading, you know, what Muslims believe is the revelation, the word of God. So it has a very different proximity with the sacred. And when it comes to the recitation of the Quran, it's following a tradition of a documented way of actually reciting it. Like Qaris, which are the reciters, we call them, who recite the Quran, they don't just recite it and freestyle like how they want to do it. There is a certain amount of freedom, but everyone, like, they have their own style, of course, but they're learning a tradition actually of how Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to recite it. It's documented, like the way the Quran is written, it's codified in a way that you know, like, how many measures each letter must have. And there's actually 10 different ways. As a photographer, I'm much more interested now in trying to capture certain things, trying to translate certain things from our experience of reality into a photograph that would really come from reality and not from my own imagination. One thing that as Muslims, like, it's very important to contemplate reality, like the appearance, but also scientifically, reality is quite unbelievable, you know. So to be aware of that is kind of an act of worship if you're aware of it. So I think that in that sense, I'm trying to see also how can photography engage with that. And yeah, I do think that photography in a way is strongest when it is connected to reality, in a way, when it feels like when you forget that you're looking at a photo. I'm very grateful that I have internet and Google Maps and such things to be able to scout locations. So I usually go online and I look for them, and I try to imagine what kind of windows they have. Can I find photos of them inside? And I organize also like how can I practically get to them, because often I need to visit a lot of them, and a lot of them they just don't seem like they could work because I'm not just interested. I need to have a big window. It needs to have clear view. It needs to have something interesting. It needs to have some kind of view, you know. And of course, the interior is important. So there's a lot of criteria that I look for, which mean that I end up going to sometimes, you know, many mosques where I don't necessarily make a picture. So there is, my criteria is based on how photogenic do I think the mosque will be. And then I go around and I go and see them, and it's a lot of it is also juggling with time, you know, because the time it takes to go there, to get the access to photograph it and then to edit it. It's a series, so there's a quantity involved. I did have in mind that I wanted to photograph the Dutch landscape. So I wanted to make the project also about the Dutch landscape and photographing it. So I was looking for places in the cities, which is of course where you have the most mosques and the most Muslim people living. But then I also went out of my way to go into all these different regions in Holland, to go in little villages, really to try to get a sense of the diversity of the landscape. So to go into suburban areas, to go into countrysides. And I was wondering, could I show, how much of Holland could I show just through windows of mosques? To try to give the sense of maybe traveling through space and time. I think it's good to know that there's a lot of work done on the computer after the photos are made. I don't necessarily like change things too much, but when I've photographed the locations to combine like the outside with the inside and to get this final photo, it takes a lot of time to go into the details, and that's also like a big part of the work, looking at the landscape, looking out. I mean, I spent a lot of time looking outside the window. You know, sometimes you go to a mosque and there's like more than 25 windows and you're okay, which one am I going to pick? You know, it also has to do with the lighting, because like when I go to these locations, I pick a certain time, knowing what side of the building I want to photograph from, and when the sun will be at the right spot, also according to the weather. So it doesn't seem that obvious, but I've had to look and connect and become sensitive more to the weather and to the sun and the passing of time, and yeah, to the way the light changes and the way the landscape looks under different lights. So then when you put the photos in the computer, it's not really like I'm trying to change things, but a photograph is really different from reality. What I try to do when I work on a computer with the photograph is I try to readjust the contrasts of things. So this is also something that for me has, by studying Islamic art, I've been quite inspired by the notion of balance, how to improve the balance in an image. And so when I'm on the computer, you know, the reality is that even if you have a really, really expensive camera, or, you know, the way a sensor and a lens and optics imprint, you know, that image, that light, it's not going to have the contrasts of reality. If you want to come close to that, it takes hours and hours of work. And it also, you have to work from your memory of how light actually works in a natural situation. New Dutch Views is part of the greater project, New Western Views. And I do hope I'll have a chance to visit other countries. The West, as we kind of generalize it's so different as soon as you travel. Even within one country, you know, there's so many differences.